Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Banfield. This is Primetime Justice. I'm about to show you something on television that should not be on television. I know that sounds very strange, but it really shouldn't be anywhere public. It should be something happening in a sterile environment like a hospital with a doctor or a nurse present. But the problem is there's this woman named Sharnisha Corley and 3 sheriff's deputies in Harris County, Texas, just outside of Houston. They stopped her apparently for running a stop sign, but then Sharnisha says an officer said he smelled marijuana coming from her car, and a female deputy then ordered her to pull her pants down. This is not a joke. She was told to pull her pants down there in the parking lot. Apparently they wanted to do a visual search. Sharnisha says she did not like that very much and protested, and then this is what happened next. Take a look. That's the dash cam, and that's Sharnisha being thrown to the ground on the camera. What ended up happening next is a confusing and lengthy, bizarre series of events, and I have to fuzz out a lot of it, but that effectively, in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, is Sharnisha naked from the waist down as her pants are being pulled off her. Naked, completely. When I say that, no underwear. And then, if you can imagine for a moment, her knees are being spread apart, and her ankles, as she lies on her stomach, are being bent up so that her feet touch her bottom. Just imagine yourself in that position right now. This is apparently the search for marijuana. The officers say they ultimately did find a small amount. No one is saying exactly where, but there are a couple things I want to point out here. That's a male officer standing there in the foreground of the picture. And that male officer was watching for quite some time as Sharnisha's heels were bent up to touch her butt, her naked butt, and her knees were spread apart. Eventually, the officer turns away and doesn't look anymore, I guess, you know, defending her honor in the smallest of ways. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Sharnisha would be on the pavement, on her belly, naked from the waist down in a public parking lot. She's handcuffed, and her knees would be continued to spread. Something else that stood out, that hand that's gloved right there. Sharnisha says that's likely the hand that was inserted into her vagina in this cavity search. Yes, it's gloved, but it's also resting comfortably on the filthy parking lot. So once again, just imagine lying in that parking lot surrounded by officers, one of them a male. You're naked as a jaybird. They're poking and prodding your body, hands everywhere. This goes on for more than 10 minutes. Likely seemed like an eternity. So what do you think would have happened here? Who would have been in trouble in this scenario? 0.02 ounces of marijuana found in or on, I can't tell you in or on Sharnisha, but the deputies were indicted by a grand jury. That did not last because a second grand jury was called, and ultimately that second grand jury got some additional evidence no one will tell us about, and the charges against those deputies were dropped. Now, the prosecutors also decided to charge Sharnisha, and then ultimately they dropped those charges against Sharnisha. Just days ago, more than 2 years after this incident, that second grand jury has decided not to re-indict the deputies, and the prosecutors have dismissed the case. So I guess you could say I'm as confused as you are. I watched the whole video. It looked pretty disgusting to me. I cannot imagine what that would feel like. On your belly, in a filthy parking lot, where anybody can see what's happening, naked from the waist down as your knees are spread apart and your heels are bent up so that they meet your butt. For 10 minutes, she was held in that position. Pants pulled off her as she's handcuffed. Al Rucker's the host of the Al Rucker Show. He joins me from Houston. Al, where am I wrong in this? Because all of it seems so wrong, I feel like I must be wrong. Am I wrong?
No, thank you for having me, Ashley. I don't believe you're wrong. After I reviewed the video and heard the young lady's statement, you're not wrong anywhere. I believe the officers were completely wrong. And as you stated at the beginning, this should have been a search that should have been done in a hospital or some sort like that. Having the young lady pretty much hogtied on the pavement is unacceptable.
You're on a radio show, and that's when you get some of the most sort of salty kinds of callers. Are people angry about this? Like, are people in Houston aghast that this can happen in a public parking lot?
They're very angry about it. Some of the people I've talked to who are aware of the story, it's just for a city this size and this type of magnitude, how we take pride in, who we are in Houston. I just can't imagine this happening here in Houston. My wife can be driving around and someone pulls her to the side and believe they smell marijuana, and then she can go through the same thing. It's very humiliating.
I'm going to talk about that marijuana in a minute, because I think that's an interesting part of this. Legally speaking, it's a unique part of this, maybe not a critical part of this, believe it or not. But I want you to hear from Sharnisha Corley, because she, in her own words, has described what this was like for her as she was 10 minutes on her belly, almost hog-tied, and as she says, with fingers being inserted into her, again, in a parking lot. Here she is.
I don't know if they were discriminating against me or what, but it was embarrassing, degrading. I felt low. I felt helpless, like I couldn't do anything, You have 2 female officers on top of you. I felt like they raped me, If you're a young lady in my situation, handcuffed on the ground, 2 women on top of you, one of them sticking their fingers in you while they're both holding your legs apart, how would you feel, I think any woman in my situation would feel helpless. They would honestly feel like I feel, like I've been sexually assaulted.
Sam Kamak is Sharnisha Corley's attorney. He joins me live from Houston as well. Sam, thanks for being with me. You were seated beside Sharnisha during that interview. I want to ask you a couple of questions, because technically speaking, this is all very hard to process. Originally, the 2 officers that performed that search were indicted. And then all of a sudden, there's some new secret evidence and a brand new convening of a grand jury, and they're not indicted, and their original indictments go away. And originally, Sharnisha's charged, and then she's not. What happened here legally?
Well, to be clear, Sharnisha's charges were immediately dismissed once the chief prosecutor that worked under the previous district attorney's office and their administration had reviewed the video and spoke with the officers. She just believed the officers were not credible, and in her own words, she said that when she watched the video that it was shocking and appalling. So they immediately dismissed the cases over a year ago against Miss Corley. But a lawfully convened grand jury indicted the officers because one of the officers also turned state's evidence against the other 2 officers. Actually, the officers that stuck her fingers inside of Miss Corley at the end is the officer that turned state's evidence against the other 2 officers. It's undeniable that these officers put their fingers inside of Miss Corley. As a matter of fact, in the internal affairs investigation report, one of the officers had stated that she believed that it was inside. She was certain, in her own words, she was certain that it was inside her vaginal cavity. And basically, a year later, in between, we filed a federal civil lawsuit suing our county. A new administration took over at the district attorney's office. The case was set for trial 3 times, I believe. At the last trial setting in May, the state announced ready. The defense lawyer filed a motion for continuance or requested a continuance. It was continued to August 4th. On August 4th, it was set for trial. The district attorney's office, a representative of the district attorney's office, went and dismissed the case against the cases against
Sam,
the officers.
That's all very in the weeds and technical for a lot of our viewers. I mean, I'm not even a lawyer, and I'm sort of trying to keep up with the technical that you're talking about, but there is something critical here. There's something called a U.S. Constitution and a Fourth Amendment right, against unlawful search and seizure. And I would say someone going up a hoo-hoo is pretty unlawful in terms of search without a warrant. You can do it. You can get a warrant, and you can ask to have a cavity search like this, but it has to be done in a sterile environment like a hospital. So here's where there's a disconnect here. As I understand it, the officers are saying she was putting up resistance, and they charged her for resisting. But yet, they actually say the words that we deny that we penetrated her without consent. So what was it? Was it a resistance or was it consent if they put their fingers inside of her?
Well, first of all, let me explain something. Miss Corley was pulled over for running a stop sign. Miss Corley gave them to consent to search the vehicle. When they searched the vehicle, they didn't find anything. As a matter of fact, on the audio, you can hear the officer telling the passenger, oh, she doesn't want to be searched, but she's going to be searched. If we have to put our hands on her, she's going to be searched. Well, they didn't find anything in the vehicle, so they had two choices. One was to arrest her for the traffic stop, or two, let her go. And in this situation, they didn't let her go. So they didn't suspect that there was marijuana inside of Miss Corley. They just decided to throw Miss Corley to the ground, take her clothes off, strip her naked, and stick their hands inside of her to see if they could find something. They had no probable cause. I know you don't like this question. I know you don't like this question, and I understand why you don't like this question. There is this notion in the legal community of something called fruit of the poisonous tree. If you search in the wrong way in this country and you break the rules, you can't use what you found. It's called fruit of the poisonous tree. And I understand that you would look at this, that anything they found inside her would be irrelevant. But it still begs the question, did they find marijuana inside of her? They claim, I don't want to re-victimize Miss Corley, and no disrespect to you, Ashley, but I don't want to re-victimize her. But I will tell you this. They're claiming they found marijuana 0.02 grams, like you said earlier, inside of Miss Corley, which obviously supports the fact that they stuck their fingers in her. Well, 0.02 grams of marijuana would be about half the size of a Skittle.
I mean, that's pretty astounding. One quick question. In the second grand jury, and this is just all so incredibly mysterious that these two officers were indicted, and then a second grand jury comes along, and none of the officials will tell us what this new secret evidence was that they presented to the second grand jury, but the second grand jury decided to make it all go away. You have a civil suit against the Harris County Sheriff. Does that mean this new and secret evidence is going to have to be presented in order to defend them against your lawsuit, or will we never know what that new and secret evidence was that let those officers go?
I'll tell you what the new evidence was, okay? Here's what the new evidence was, and they had this evidence all along. They've had it since September of last year. So Miss Corley started having stomach cramps close to 14 weeks after this incident occurred. She went to the hospital, and they determined that she had a tubal pregnancy, and they did surgery on her. And one of the doctors at the hospital said that she was only 5 weeks pregnant at that time. However, another doctor, which we have the documentation, said that Miss Corley was from 0 to 14 weeks pregnant, which would have put her 2 weeks pregnant at the time of the rape. And so the district attorney's office said, well, she told the grand jury at the first grand jury proceeding that she was pregnant, and that came out, I guess, according to the other doctor, that it wasn't true, that she was only 5 weeks pregnant. But that's my whole point. This has nothing to do with the criminal behavior of the police officers. Absolutely nothing. It's ludicrous.
And I'm going to, it was awfully confusing, that whole point that you just made, but you did use the word rape. And that brings me to the most critical question here. Why are you suing for assault and battery, Fourth Amendment violation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and offensive physical contact, and not sexual assault? Why is there no sex assault in any of the language in your lawsuit?
Well, we just filed a civil lawsuit in the Southern District, and it's seeking, obviously, monetary damages. And by the way, the newly elected district attorney's office didn't get involved in the case until after the suit was filed. The previous administration had no conversations with the county attorney, but the new administration has had several conversations with the county attorney who represents the county in our lawsuit.
Okay, stand by for a second, Sam, if you will. I want to, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just basically, Ashley, is the fact that this civil rights violation under Section 1983, that violation stands, whatever our allegations are in the federal civil lawsuit. That's what we're standing by. And so we don't have to particularly allege sexual assault, and we allege that her her civil rights were violated, and we're moving forward on that.
Okay, joining me now, Darren Porcher is a retired NYPD lieutenant and criminal justice expert, and former prosecutor Randy Zellin is seated beside him as well. First to you, Darren, you train officers. Have you ever seen anything like this? Have you ever had to deal with anything like this? Is this as astounding to you as it is to me, the layperson in your business?
Absolutely, it's astounding. I was a lieutenant in the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau, and on many occasions I've disciplined officers for this type of action. Granted, it is an aberration, but I can't see a cogent argument that the officers can introduce in connection with conducting a strip search on the side of a highway. There are specific guidelines.
By the way, not a strip search, a full cavity search. A strip search is bend over, cough, and will look.
A cavity search.
Can I just say that, by the way? I learned this, that the search that you get in a prison, which is, you know, everybody's sort of Hollywood notion of what a strip search is. The strip search you get in a prison is bend over, naked, hold your ankles and cough. And they look. They don't poke. This went beyond that, Randy. Is there any justification you can see for this at all?
Disciplinary, internal affairs, no. Criminal, I think that's a completely different discussion. You brought up the issue of sexual assault. It's not a sexual assault because that statute requires it's got to be done for someone's sexual gratification. So that goes out the window. The interesting thing, though, and the counterintuitive thing is that the prosecutor actually did her a favor by dismissing the case. Why? Because if these 2 officers or 3 officers had been charged criminally, the civil case gets put on hold in order to preserve their Fifth Amendment privilege. There's no longer a Fifth Amendment issue, which means the civil suit can now go forward, and they have to testify.
I mean, it is super fascinating stuff. I mean, just seeing the look on your face, I think, was enough for me to understand, yeah, there's nothing that I'm not getting here. This is just plain and simple wrong.
It's ludicrous, to say the least.
Ludicrous, to say the least. Thank you to all of you.